Hi everybody, today's just a quick one talking a little bit about the Shenmue III Kickstarter. I just kind of wanted to add my voice to the positive side of this issue because I feel like through a lot of media sources, the negative spin to this story has really been pushed, and a lot of people are not only just sort of buying only the negative side, but they're really sort of moving towards that negative perception of what's going on rather than the positive because they're getting more information. And it really speaks to something that I think has been sort of plaguing the gaming community for a long time, something that's been an underlying component of strong fan bases that has really sort of ballooned into an actual problem that's affecting the industry within the past generation or two of consoles. And that's negative attitudes, pessimism, looking only at the negative side of things, fans saying a game is crap simply because it's popular, or saying something is incredible simply because it wasn't popular, fighting like all kinds of infighting within fan bases, like the Persona fans fighting against the hardcore mainline Shin Megami Tensei fans, where instead they should be working together and really showing how those fan bases work together and introduce each other to both sides of the fan base and show their love for that type of thing. They can make the franchise grow. And that really speaks to what's going on with the Shenmue III Kickstarter. As soon as it was announced, there was immediate just sort of negative backlash that didn't exist. And it's an odd thing where all the information and the truth is out there and readily accessible, yet people ignore it and go into negative speculation, feeling that every big company and everything they do is basically a real world Shinra, where there's this big mega corporation with just these really negative intents that are just going to steal your money, and not understanding how Kickstarter, while it can be used negatively and it can be used to take advantage of people and of fans, is something that is also turning into the only real way we're going to get these games that we really want. It's something where your voice can be heard beyond just voting with the dollar after the product is already made. It's something where you can vote with your dollar, you can vote with that ultimate voting tool before something is even created. You can make something come into being that otherwise would not have existed. Something like Shenmue 3, the Kickstarter was going to happen with or without Sony's involvement. That's already been covered many times, yet for some reason a lot of people are under the impression that Sony's involvement made this a reality. No, Yu Suzuki decided 3 years ago when he found out about the Kickstarter that this was the way to go, and it just took a while to be able to get to that point, and realizing over that 3 year period of planning that no matter how successful a Kickstarter was going to be, he was going to be able to finally finish the story of Shenmue. We were finally going to be able to get closure, either in a third game or trying to push to get like a fourth game out there. No matter what, we were going to get through Kickstarter. The fan base was strong enough. We were going to get an end to the story. But he was also smart enough to realize that the Kickstarter would not be able to fully fund the Shenmue experience that we want if we want it to equal the experience of something like Shenmue 1 and 2. And that does, though, bring up another point of misconception where many people believe that something like Shenmue 3 takes 50, 60, 70 million dollars to make. I got into an argument with a friend talking about that, and it's simply not true. The budget for Shenmue 1 and 2 is overblown. That figure of over 100 million that it cost includes all of Shenmue 1 and all of Shenmue 2, and the creation of Shenmue 1 as originally a Sega Saturn game. It's basically the production cost of making Shenmue 1 and a half times and making Shenmue 2, and a lot of that cost came from making their own engine for Shenmue 1 and 2 that was so ahead of its time, and just it was so costly as far as the pre-production elements that don't exist here. They're using the Unreal 4 engine. So this will be a much cheaper game than either Shenmue 1 or 2. And you bring into something where the highest estimates for how much it costs to make The Witcher 3 are around 32 million. And those estimates vary a little bit, but that's sort of the higher end of the estimates. And Shenmue 3 is not going to be as big as something like The Witcher 3. It's not going to be as big of a AAA production. It's not a AAA production. It is an indie kickstarted game that has some assistance, some funding through Sony. It is not a AAA game. It is not going to be as big and expensive as something like The Witcher. So if you look at 32 million, something like Shenmue 3 will cost anywhere from a third to half of that. And Yu Suzuki has said 10 million is what he really needs to make it the all-out Shenmue experience, not just the story, not just an interactive experience, but a full-on open-world Shenmue game. And that's really where it comes into play that it's kind of like looking at the budget of a giant corporation, looking at the budget of many governments where there's all kinds of unnecessary spending, there's all kinds of waste, there's all kinds of just sort of redundant spending in a lot of AAA gaming, and you look at how beautiful some of these indie games are that don't require those massive overblown budgets. And Shenmue 3 is somewhere in between, where it's going to be budget-wise one of the bigger of those types of indie games, but it's not going to be up to that AAA level. You don't really need Sony to come in and drop a ton of money and fully fund this thing, which they're not. It's been explained by Sony, it's been explained by Yu Suzuki, it's really just out there where almost all, 80 to 90% of the funding for the development costs of the game are coming from the Kickstarter, and any funding outside of that from an undisclosed third-party supporter, possibly just an individual, you never know, versus what Sony is willing to fork over is dependent on how well the Kickstarter does. All those goals that you're seeing pop up, and a bunch more are going to pop up at the time of filming, rolling up to the 5 million mark for a stretch goal, and it's going to go down to that 10 for the full experience. If the Kickstarter doesn't reach those individual goals, those things will not exist within the full game. It doesn't even matter who puts any more funding or effort into it after the Kickstarter. The Kickstarter is really the thing that is kickstarting this project. It is the thing that is funding it and putting it forward. And what Sony is doing, what anyone else is doing, it's already been explained that any sort of funding or any sort of effort from an outside source is completely dependent on how much the Kickstarter generates. So if you're holding back or not giving it all to the Kickstarter because of this negative perception of the situation, it's going to affect the full game. That's guaranteed. We're going to get Shenmue 3. It's already a guaranteed thing, but we might not be able to get the full experience that you want if we don't put effort into creating a better experience through this Kickstarter. And as far as Sony goes, their involvement is, without the involvement of Sony, there really would not have been a PS4 version. Possibly down the road it could have been digitally put through PS4, but the whole thing with Sony is they are covering distribution costs. We're almost guaranteed a physical PS4 version. I see that coming up all the time, and I wish that is something that would be explained in the Kickstarter and made part of a goal. It still could be towards the end, but it is doubtful only because they're two very separate things. The Kickstarter, like I said, would have existed with or without Sony, and Sony is handling sort of the post-Kickstarter part of that experience. And really, I feel that a lot of what is happening negatively with this Kickstarter is because of this perception that it's really just a large company wanting fans to give free money to them to pay for the production of a game. And in a very simplistic sense, that is true, but it's true in that Sony is a company that has to answer to investors and has to show that something is going to make them money somehow. And Shenmue 3 is too risky of a project. It hasn't been touched in 14 years because no one was willing to fork over the money for it. And you can show people, look at all these fan websites, look at all these, all these polls, look at all this and all that, but you can't really put a number to that. You can't really figure out how many, is that just a few thousand really loud and active fans? How many people is that? How many people are willing to actually support something like this? To show definitive proof to something like an investor, you need to have numbers, and those solid numbers come in the form of money, come in the form of something like a Kickstarter, where this is showing that there actually is this much interest, and this is a tool that can be used to bring back franchises that otherwise wouldn't exist. Something that is very high risk that a lot of fans want is very unlikely to be created because of that risk, because there has to be proof first that it is a viable creation. If we want things like The Legend of Dragoon 2, if you want just any of these like old franchises to come back, if you want remakes, if you want something in the style of these old franchises, these sort of impossible projects to come into existence, it is going to have to be through something like Kickstarter. A company is not going to take such a huge risk on a project like that because of the state of the industry. If this was the 90s, yes, a company probably would do that, but now the costs are too high. It is too much of it's straight indie or straight AAA big budget thing, there's been sort of a death of the gaming middleman, these things that are not indie, these things that are not AAA, these areas where a lot of risks were taken in sort of that middle ground that has been kind of slowly dying, and I think this is a way that can reinvigorate that. And the only thing is, we just have to be intelligent consumers, intelligent gamers, and be able to really understand when something like this happens. Is this a company trying to take advantage of a dream, or is this something that is the product, the project of someone like a creator, of a developer, of a certain team, of a visionary, of anyone? Is this something that is their goal and their project that you are helping to fulfill, that is just having a partnership with a company, or is a company just going out and saying we're doing this and then bringing in someone else? And we just have to really be careful with that kind of thing, but remain positive and not just approach everything from just this negative standpoint. We really have to, if we want to have the gaming experiences that we really desire, we have to learn to look at things in a positive light and just look through and decide for ourselves, look through the information, do the research, not listen to some talking heads giving a perception that is derived from a lot of misinformation. Finding both sides of the coin, reading and researching, the same as you would with anything else before you invest in this type of thing. And don't hold back because of the possibility of negative perceptions. Shenmue 3, again, I said, it's not all about Shenmue 3 as a game. It's about what Shenmue 3 represents and the future of consumer-driven gaming. It's going to be something where the consumers are going to have the power to fund and support specific developers in that small to mid level and really bring about these creations we want, instead of being at the mercy of giant investor-driven corporations. It's something where we have a unique opportunity, and Shenmue 3's success is a way to show that we can continue to do things like this, and we can bring back these old franchises that we want to see in the form of sequels or remakes or just redistributions or things that are inspired by those old stories and characters, and support people. We need to support these kind of things, and we need to not hold back just because of a perception where, wow, maybe, there won't be a physical PS4 version just because it hasn't been announced yet. At least put forward that $5, that $29, one of those lower bids to make the game that you really want, because if you're right and there isn't a physical PS4 version, which is very unlikely that there won't be, then no matter what, you're still getting Shenmue 3. And if you're wrong and you hold back and don't because you're not certain and you do get a physical version, the complete game suffers just because of a possibility that there wasn't going to be the form that you wanted. It's something where everyone, we just have to remain positive. We have to support the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter, again, not just because it's Shenmue 3, but because it represents something as a sort of a change in the way gaming is going.